Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Cordumt, and in this video I'll be making a new player guide for Divinity Original Sin 2. Now, let me start by saying that this guide is not just for new players, people who've never played the game before or are just starting out with the game. It's also a useful guide for players coming back, players wanting to learn more about the game, or also improve on their gameplay, in case maybe you want to tackle a higher difficulty setting, or maybe even a different challenge. With that being said, this guide is going to apply to all difficulty settings. Personally, I have never played the game in anything other than Tactician, so all the things I'm going to talk about and show during the course of this video are going to apply to Tactician difficulty, so they will also apply to all of the easier difficulties as well. I also want to give a little bit of context on Original Sin 2 as a game and as a CRPG. I would say it is a very solid game, it's a pretty fun game, especially combat is very enjoyable with all of the unique interactions that they added. And it's also not one of the more complex or difficult games to get into, especially if you compare it with, let's say, some Dungeons and Dragons titles, or for example the Pathfinder games like Kingmaker or Wrath of the Righteous. It is not as complex as those games to get started, but it still does have its own unique system, its own unique quirks and interactions, things you might not know if they are good, if they are bad, how they work in conjunction with others for synergies. So, during the course of this video, I aim to cover all of those things so that you can be better informed and better prepared, be it for your first playthroughs or if you want to go for a higher difficulty setting or challenge. Now, there will be a lot of topics covered in this video, so it's likely to be a long one. So I encourage you guys to look at the progress bar on the video. There will be timestamps for the different topics covered in case you want to jump to a particular one. So let's start by covering difficulty settings. We have 4 difficulty settings. Starting from easiest to hardest, we have Story, Explorer, Classic, and Tactician modes. If you are still getting accustomed to the game, I would definitely recommend going for Explorer or Classic modes. I do not recommend Story mode, and the reason for that is that this mode really is for people who are mostly interested in exploring the story and don't really care about combat at all, which I don't think is what the average player is looking for in this game. I do think you guys want to have some fun and at least some challenge in combat, so I would not recommend Story mode for that reason. And on the opposite spectrum, I also do not recommend Tactician mode. Now, Tactician mode is not impossibly hard, but it still has its difficulty and it can lead to a lot of frustration, especially if you are starting out, getting accustomed to the game system, learning how the combat works, exploring different areas, and that's going to lead into a less enjoyable experience and probably give you a bad opinion of the game. For some comparison here, if we think about this game compared to, again, the Pathfinder games, Kingmaker, Wrath of the Righteous, it's not as punishing as starting on Unfair on those games, for example. And also, if you've played Baldur's Gate 3 before, which is from the same people that made this game, I do believe that Tactician mode in Original Sin 2 is significantly more difficult than Tactician mode on Baldur's Gate 3. So if you know that comparison, keep that in mind. Another reference, Tactician difficulty is the only one that allows you to pick Honor mode. You may know this mode from other games by a different name, such as Hardcore mode or Iron Man mode. Essentially, if you have a single save file, if your party dies, that save file is automatically deleted and you need to start the game over from the beginning. It is the ultimate challenge the game has to offer, but it can also be pretty painful to lose a lot of progress, especially in a game as long as this one. So yeah, if you are getting accustomed to the game, I recommend Explorer or Classic modes, and for the purpose of this video, I will start a new one in Classic mode, just so we can jump into the character creation screen. Okay, so here we are in our character creation screen, and let's talk briefly about our first tab here in Origin. If you are unfamiliar with Divinity titles, the way this works is you can play with a character that has an Origin background, or you can play with a custom background. The main difference here is that an origin character is going to have certain specifics that you cannot change. Like, for example, the Red Prince over here, he is a male lizard and he is red. And if you look, for example, for Sybil, she is a female elf. Now, besides that, I recommend going for origin. And the reason for it is I think you're going to have a much richer and more enjoyable experience if you play with origin characters. Be it your main character or also your companions, because you can have these guys as your companions. So an origin character is going to have his own personality, he's going to have his own voice actor, he will have his unique storyline and quest line, he is going to have unique interactions with areas that you explore in the game, factions that you meet in the game, NPCs as well. So I do think you get a much more complete experience if you play with origin characters than you do with custom characters. The only reason that I personally see for going for a custom character is if you really want to go with a type of character that you cannot get from the origin choices, because you have 6 choices, which are the Red Prince, Sybil, Ifan Ben Mezd, Beast, Losa, and Fane. So if you want to go for, say, a female undead lizard, you cannot get it outside of custom, so that would be a reason for going for it. But other than that, I definitely recommend pick one of the origin characters. I think it's going to give you a better experience. Now, you get to listen to the origin story, you have a brief introduction to the character, you can see some of his unique abilities, his talents, and then you also have a build preset, which is the most important part of this screen here. Now, you have a variety of presets the game gives you, and what I want to make clear about this is, if you want to get some idea of what these presets are supposed to be, you can just put the mouse over the name, it's going to give you a description. But what I want you to understand is that when you pick a preset, it's not something set in stone. You can build your character in any way you want as you progress the game. It doesn't matter what it is, you can build it however you like. You're never going to be tied in any way to your preset. Also, this game, at a certain point, semi-early, is going to give you the option to freely and at will respec any of your characters, be it your main character or your companions, whenever you like. So you can just build whatever you want, you're not tied to the preset. What the preset is, and it does give some help, especially for new players, is a recommendation or a suggestion on how to start building your character. Nothing more than that. We're going to talk more about it in this tab over here. In terms of appearance, we're only talking about, personal preference. You can pick whatever you want. And for the presets, you can once again choose whatever you want here. Read the description. Actually, it doesn't show the description here. Interesting. But yeah, you can pick it again over here and you can customize it however you want. For making the example clearer, I like to use the wizard preset to exemplify. And this preset is going to suggest a bonus of intelligence and constitution. It's going to suggest pyrokinetic, geomancer, and lore master, and also a couple of skills. Now, if you look at this, you can edit and you can do whatever you want. You can pick wizard and you can still put 3 points in strength if you choose to do so. Like I said, you can do whatever you want. But before we get into that, I want to start by covering what these things are so you have some understanding of how they work, and then we can move on to, how you would build a character, synergies, and stuff like that. So for attributes, these are very, very simple. Strength increases damage with strength-based weapons and skills. So, like if you are using a one-handed sword, a hammer, a two-handed axe, that kind of thing, it's going to increase damage of those weapons. And then you will also have skills which are based on strength. This will also increase that damage. It also allows you to carry more weight in your inventory. So, very simple to understand attribute. Finesse is even simpler. Increases your damage with finesse-based weapons and skills. So, like a bow, a crossbow, daggers for a rogue, that kind of thing. Intelligence determines intelligence-based damage you deal. Think Fireball, think Winter Blast, you know, damage spells. Constitution just determines how much vitality you have. This is your health pool, your hit points. Memory is going to determine how many abilities you can have memorized at any given time. I will get more in detail about this when we actually cover gameplay elements, but you know, it's basically just that. And then wits is going to affect your critical chance, your initiative, and your ability to detect hidden things like traps, treasures, and stuff like that. So all of them are pretty simple, and one thing I also want to mention is that you are going to have items throughout the game which are going to have different requirements. You may find a piece of armor that requires like 12 finesse, or 13 strength, or 11 intelligence. You know, these things will happen, and you may need to put some points into any of these if you want to use them. But generally speaking, it's not a very high requirement. Moving on to abilities, this is what we're going to spend most of our time in the character creation screen. We have combat abilities, which are going to affect combat, as the name suggests, and then we have civil abilities, which are going to affect things outside of combat, like, let's say, bartering, dialogue, interactions with items in the game world, sneaking and stealing, that kind of thing. So, starting with combat abilities. The first thing I want to mention is that all of these abilities are going to have their own description, such as, you know, warfare increases all physical damage you deal, but just like with the attributes, these are also going to be a requirement for any spell or skill that you want to learn or use. Let's give an example here for warfare. Think Whirlwind. Whirlwind is a warfare ability. If you want to learn how to cast Whirlwind and if you want to use it, you need to have a couple of points into warfare. Different skills are going to have different requirements. I think normally at most it's like, what, 3 for the majority of everything that you can cast. So it's not very high. But yeah, keep that in mind that these will also be a requirement for casting skills of that, let's call them schools. So warfare increases physical damage you deal, period. Huntsman increases damage bonus when attacking from high ground. This game implements high ground very well. What this means is if you have higher ground than your enemies, you are going to be dealing more damage to them. Now, this is going to be a good example of what I just talked about regarding requirements. If we look at Huntsman and we look at Warfare, and let's take the example of an archer, okay? You may think, oh, I have an archer, I'm gonna put all of my points into Huntsman because I want my archer to shoot from up above, and it's also the requirement for my archery skills. However, if we compare these two, Huntsman gives us a 5% bonus if we are on high ground, but Warfare just gives us a 5% bonus, flat. It doesn't matter where you are, low ground, same ground, high ground, you always get this bonus. So Warfare is straight up better than Huntsman, if you are thinking about, for example, an archer. And if you also think of a spellcaster for the majority of cases, let's say you want to cast a Fireball. This can increase the damage you deal, but so does Pyrokinetic, right? Or Hydrosophist for water magic. There may be some exceptions, but I can't even think of one right now. So this would be the type of ability where I only put points to meet the requirements of the skills I want to cast. I would not put points here for the purpose of increasing the damage. Next up we have Scoundrel. This is more for rogue type abilities. Increases your movement speed and also boosts critical modifier. By the way, I want to mention something. Huntsman also gives you access to some support abilities as well as movement abilities, which are very, very good. Scoundrel, like I said, is more for a rogue character. It increases your critical multiplier, so if you crit, you deal more damage, and you also have more movement speed. More movement speed translates into, in this game, when you are fighting in your turn in combat, if you want to move, you need to spend action points for movement. And each action point is going to equate to a certain number of, or to a certain distance. Let's say one action point gives you 5 meters. I'm just making this up. If you have more movement speed, then instead of 5, you might have 6 or 7 or 8, depending on what you put here. Now, Scoundrel has a lot of stuff for rogues, but it also has some pretty cool abilities for disabling your enemies, as well as for buffing your own characters. More on the specific side, but we'll get into that later as well. Pyrokinetic, fire damage, think fireballs, think explosions. This is what you want to use for that. This school not only gives you access to damage abilities, but it also gives you access to some pretty cool buffs, both for yourself as well as for your party. Hydrosophist is for water magic. It will increase water damage you deal, but it's also the best supporting ability that you have in the game. This is what is going to allow you to heal your characters with healing spells, healing their vitality, and it will also be useful for magic armor restoration. We're going to cover armor a little bit further in gameplay topics. So, very useful to have at least somebody focusing on this. Aerothurge, this is air damage, this is lightning spells, and also gives you access to some very, very powerful displacement effects, such as a teleportation spell, which can be very, very useful. Geomancer is for poison and earth damage, and it also gives you access to some cool buffs that specialize in increasing or restoring your physical armor or your party members' physical armor. Necromancer will heal you whenever you deal damage directed to vitality, so it's a type of lifesteal, and it gives you access to necromancy spells, which enable you to complement your party in a cool way, so you can deal physical damage with your spellcasters also, but again, I'll cover that more in detail in the gameplay sections. Summoning increases vitality, damage, physical armor, and magic armor of your summons and totems, so if you like playing with summons, this is what you want. And Polymorph provides 1 free attribute point per point invested, so if you put a point here, you can then put 1 point in memory, strength, finesse, whatever you want. Polymorph gives you access to basically like shape-shifting or metamorphing abilities, such as you can change your limbs to do something special. It can give you some cool movement abilities by changing the way your body works, and it can also modify the body or shape of your enemies as well. Pretty cool as well, but something that I would also pretty much only put points for meeting requirements. Now, moving to weapons and defense, this is where things get a little bit weird, because for the vast majority of players, I would say never put a point in any of this. So this requires some explanation because it's not going to be obvious. If you look at any of these, single-handed, two-handed, ranged, and dual-wielding, you will see that each and every one of these is going to give you a plus 5% damage, so it's the same thing that Warfare does, but it also gives you an additional bonus. Like, for example, single-handed gives you more accuracy, two-handed gives you more crit, stuff like that. Now, why is this not something I would use? Because these bonuses that you get from these abilities are additive. And what that means is, when you deal damage to an enemy, the way the game calculates damage is, it will take the damage that the weapon deals, and then, if the bonus is additive, it will add that bonus on top of that damage. This applies to the majority of damage bonuses in the game, but Warfare is multiplicative. So instead of adding this bonus to whatever damage you are going to deal, it will multiply. So you would have your base weapon damage plus other bonuses you might get from other sources multiplied by your Warfare bonus. And for that reason, Warfare is going to come out on top of pretty much every situation if we're talking about physical damage dealers. Even taking into consideration that these give you something extra like, you know, critical multiplier or critical chance and stuff like that. There are some niche situations that you can have which would justify putting points here. For example, and I'll just give this example which, serves the purpose. If you are building a two-handed character and you build him in such a way that you can pretty much guarantee 100% critical hits every single time, then going for something like two-handed is going to come out on top of Warfare, because you get more damage and you get more critical multiplier, which, if you are always critting, is going to result in more damage. Even so, it's not that much of a difference from Warfare, I would say. And for defense, you have Retribution, you reflect damage, Leadership gives you some dodge and resistances to all of your element types, and Perseverance restores some armor after you recover from some type of disabling effect. For the most part, these are like fun things to have. I wouldn't call them anything other than that. I think you would always be better served putting points in anything else, especially up here, than you would putting points into defense. Moving on to civil abilities, let's talk briefly about these. Telekinesis allows you to move items telepathically regardless of weight. I would call this useless for the most part. I never put any points here. I wouldn't recommend you put any points here either. Lore Master. This is one of the important ones. It allows you to identify enemies and items. So you always want to have one person in your party, and only one person, because one is enough. It gets shared for anybody in the party. Because if you pick up an item, you want to be able to know what that item does. Lore Master enables that. If you get into a fight and you want to examine your enemy to see what talents they have, what weaknesses they have, what are their strengths, this allows to examine them. If you don't have it, you don't have that ability, which in my opinion is going to be a major downside. I would always have one character with this as high as possible. For nasty deeds, you have sneaking, which basically means if you are sneaking, how far away your enemies can detect you. I would also call this useless. It's very rare that you would need points in this. Even at 0, you can sneak around and use it very effectively, so I would say this is a waste. Thievery is one of the important ones as well. It allows you to lockpick, locks, containers and stuff like that, and it also allows you to steal from characters by pickpocketing. This is something that I always have one person in the party with as well, because you want to make sure if you find a door or a lootable container that you are able to open those things. And if you want to steal from people in the game, which can be very rewarding, it's also going to affect that. For personality, bartering is going to improve your haggling. So if you are trading with somebody, you are going to get more money from the things you sell, you are going to pay less from the things you buy. It's cool. I normally wouldn't bother too much with this. And like I said, you can respec at any point in the game, so if you really wanted to sell or buy a bunch of things, you could even just respec, get somebody with this maxed, and then use that person to buy or sell the items. Personally, I don't find it to be worth the bother or the time spent, but it's something you can do and it can benefit you. But the point here is, I would not consider this as important as the other stuff. Persuasion, this affects dialogues. You are going to have dialogue options and dialogue choices which are tied behind persuasion checks. If your persuasion is 0, you are going to fail those checks. If you have high enough persuasion, you can pass those checks. Is this crucial and mandatory for the game? No. But it can allow you to get different options in dialogue, in quests, maybe lead into better rewards or different outcomes of a quest, maybe even avoid combat and just resolve a situation using dialogue. So I would say this one is a cool thing to have because it can unlock options for you during the course of the game. And finally, Lucky Charm increases your likelihood of finding extra treasure wherever loot is stashed. This might seem worthless. I would say it's one of the best ones as well. What this does is, if you have Lucky Charm at 0, whenever you loot a container, you will only get whatever that container has, nothing more. But if you have at least 1 point in Lucky Charm, and then the more you have, the higher chance you have, it has a chance of spawning a new item in that container. This is very, very good, because the items it spawns are items scaled to the area that you are currently on. And this means you can get access to some pretty powerful items, and even if you don't end up using them, you can sell them for a lot of money. Lucky Charm can seem pretty underwhelming. This adds up to a lot during the course of the entire game. It is extremely useful and something I recommend. So we have a maximum of 4 people in the party. I would recommend 1 person maxing Lore Master, 1 person maxing Thievery, 1 person maxing Persuasion, and the other one maxing Lucky Charm. And finally, we have our skills. The skills you can pick from here are from the abilities in which you put a point. And I'm not going to cover all of the abilities, I just want to talk a little bit about the suggestion that the preset is giving you and how synergies work. So if we look at the Wizard preset, it's giving you a recommendation of Pyrokinetic with Geomancer. And this is a good suggestion, because in this game there is a lot of interaction between different skills, different spells, different surfaces on the environment. And as a very good example, you have this spell here, which is going to cover your enemies and create an oil surface where it lands. Oil can be blown up or set on fire with fire spells. So if you have access to earth magic and you also have access to fire magic, you can make that interaction work in your favor. Geomancer also gives you poison abilities, like these. Poison also interacts with fire, it also explodes, so it's another beneficial thing you can combine with your Pyrokinetic and Geomancer. If you were to say, change this, and again I'll reiterate that you can do whatever you want, you could say that you want to pick fire and water magic, okay? But this is an example that does not give you a lot of synergy. Let's look at this example here. This is a spell that deals water magic. It is going to chill your enemies and it may even freeze them, disabling them for a full turn, which is very powerful. But if you freeze somebody and then you hit them with fire, you're going to remove the freeze. So essentially, you use the cool spell, which is going to apply a debuff or a disable on an enemy, and then you are countering your own spell by using fire on that frozen or chilled character. This does not work very well in conjunction. And trust me, if you go for something like this, you are gonna find yourself in situations in combat where all you can do is something that you don't want to do. So make sure that you pick something that synergizes between each other. And like I said, the presets are a good way of giving you some recommendations. If we look, for example, at the Enchanter, it suggests combining Hydrosophist with Aerothurge, which again makes a lot of sense. You can create a water puddle or make people be wet with rain, and then you can electrify them with a lightning spell, electrifying the water surface, shocking people, stunning people, so it works in conjunction very, very well. Okay, so I think this covers what I want to talk about regarding presets. Let's move on to talents. Talents, you have a lot of them to choose from. I am not going to go over all of them. I may reference a couple which I find to be very, very strong, and even strong enough that they will even change how you approach combat. But for the most part, look at what they do, think about what your character wants to do, and then pick something accordingly. Again, the preset also suggests something for you. So in the case of the wizard, it suggests Far Out Man, increasing the range of your skills and scrolls by 2 meters. Since you are a wizard, you are casting spells, you typically want to be at range, shooting from afar, shooting from high ground. This makes sense, okay? But again, there might be multiple other things that also make sense. Go over them, see what you like, and pick something that adjusts to you. For tags, these are just something that's going to interact with dialogue. It's not very important, it just gives you different options. If you are choosing an origin character, these are tied to your character. The Red Prince, for example, is a noble and a scholar. You cannot pick anything else here. I think it might also be tied to your preset. No, it's just to your origin. Okay. And finally, you have your instruments. This is just going to determine what type of music plays while you are playing the game. Again, it's just personal preference. Okay, so here we are in the new game, and I'm going to talk about a couple of things which I think are important to cover and can also give you a better quality of life as you play the game. So, to start, I'm going to talk about the hotbar and also your skills. So if you want to see which skills you can cast and which skills you know, you can come over here into your skill panel or press K, and you're going to have available skills over here and memorized skills over here. And I'm going to make a brief analogy to Dungeons & Dragons because some people might think this works in the same way. It doesn't. On available skills, it shows all the skills you have learned. These are the skills that you know. They will always be present here. In the memorized skills are the skills that you have memorized or prepared or made available for use. So I know these 3 skills, and if we look at our action bar here, I can cast any of these 3 skills, plus innate skills which I don't need to memorize, right? If I don't have something memorized, I cannot cast it. I cannot cast Fortify if it is not memorized. That's the basis of how to select your spells. This is not like Dungeons & Dragons where if you want to memorize something, you need to take something out, memorize it, and then rest to be able to use it. That concept does not exist here. As long as you are out of combat, you can change this at will at any time. There is no problem. Also, in terms of memorization, these spells do not have a select number of uses. It's cooldown based. Okay? So you cast them, it has a cooldown. Once the cooldown is over, you can cast them again. Now, normally you will cast your spells from your hotbar. If you want to move your skills around in the hotbar, you need to unlock this padlock, and then you can drag and drop and do whatever you want with them. And you can even remove stuff from the hotbar that you don't want to have there. It might be something you put by accident, or it might be something that got automatically added without you wanting it. So you can just drag and drop outside, it gets removed. If you want to add back in, you just drag and drop in as well. Same thing with items from your inventory. You can just drag and drop and place them in your hotbar. Now, something that the game does by default is, whenever you pick something from the ground, like a consumable, or for example an arrow, a grenade, a scroll, a potion, it automatically puts it into your action bar. That is going to clutter up your action bar very, very quickly. It's very annoying in my opinion. And you actually have 5 action bars, which you can control from over here. But what I can pretty much guarantee, and this happens to me all the time, is that if your skill is not on the first action bar, you are going to forget it exists. It happens to me all the time. So in order to keep this clean, what I suggest is going into options, gameplay I believe, yeah, and then down here in gameplay you have automated hotbar behavior. I recommend having remove unmemorized skills and then add skills. So what this means is, when you memorize a new skill, it automatically gets added back into your hotbar, and if you unmemorize it, it gets automatically removed. As we saw before, I unmemorize, it gets removed, I memorize, it gets added back on. But I disable everything else. So I don't want arrows and consumables and containers and blah 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 automatically added. I think these two are the best option to keep your hotbar clean and automatically adding things which really are relevant for the gameplay. Other than this, the other thing I want to cover when you are starting a new game is you have gift bag features. This is something that I believe comes with the Definitive Edition. It wasn't present when I first played the game, but I think Definitive Edition now always has it. And these are, you know, a variety of things you can add. Some of them, I would call them like mini cheats, like this one here. It increases the amount of action points you can have, making your life easier. It affects combat, right? And then you also have other things which only affect your quality of life while playing the game without affecting combat itself. So it's something I wouldn't consider to be like a cheat or an exploit. I'm not going to cover all of these things. You can judge for yourself what you want to use or even if you want to use them. Disclaimer, if you activate any, doesn't matter if it's a cheat or if it's not a cheat, if you activate any gift bag feature, you're gonna get a warning because your achievements are going to get disabled. If you care about achievements, do not enable any gift bag feature. There are also some features which you can enable and disable at will, and others that if you apply, you can no longer remove them. So pay some attention to those warnings when you are selecting these things. Like I said, for the purpose of time, I'm not going to cover all of this. The ones I recommend, if you don't mind losing achievements, are Endless Runner. This allows you to toggle an option that means your characters run faster in the game world. It does not affect combat at all. It just means you can move around the world faster. It's a time save, it's quality of life. Personally, I use it. Improved organization. I don't recommend this. The name seems like an improvement. It's actually worse. It's going to add a bunch of containers into your inventory. It's going to make everything very, very messy. I do not recommend it. Fort Joy Magic Mirror. Like I mentioned before, in this game, you will be able to respec your characters for free and at will starting on Act 2. If you want to have access to that earlier, you can enable this and you will also get it in Act 1. Enhanced Spirit Vision I also recommend. At some point in the game you are gonna get a skill that if you activate it, it gets turned on for a couple of minutes, but then it gets turned off. And this means you need to constantly reapply it if you want to make sure you're not missing out on anything in the game world, which can be annoying, and you can forget to use it, which means you're gonna miss out on some things. You don't miss out on anything super crucial, but you can miss out on lore, on information about quests, maybe some kind of different quest outcome. So I do think that this is something that's worth having if you don't want to deal with that hassle. Other than that, there's nothing here that I see as something I would recommend particularly, but again, you can look over these and decide on what you want. Alright, so let's start covering some important gameplay aspects here, and I hope you guys appreciate that we are on our little training ground for the purpose of the guide. But yeah, I loaded up this save file. It's actually the only save file I have. It's for my Tactician Honor Mode playthrough that I'm currently uploading on the channel. But I do believe this save file is going to have everything I want to show for the purpose of the guide. And I want to start talking about defenses. So every character in the game can have 3 types of defenses here in terms of buffers. Every single one is going to have a health pool, your hit points. If these reach 0, you die. That's pretty basic. But then you can also have physical armor in this little white bar, and you can have magic armor in this blue bar. The amount of armor any character may or may not have, or if they even have it at all, depends on the character, and it depends on the gear that they are using. Now, as a basic thing, it's pretty simple and straightforward. If you want to kill somebody, an enemy, you need to make their hit points reach 0. But for you to be able to even hit their hit points, you first need to go through the corresponding magic armor. So, for example, if you want to kill somebody... Where are you going? If you want to kill somebody with physical damage, you first need to break their physical armor. So you see right there, we dealt a bunch of damage, but it only went through the physical armor. It did not actually reach any of his hit points. And the same thing applies for magic. If you want to kill somebody with magic, first it will eat through the magic armor, and we can see it right here because it has a damage over time effect. And only after the magic armor is depleted will it actually hit the hit points, as you saw right there. So that is the basics of how armor works, and as you saw, it's pretty straightforward. There is one exception to what I just said. There are some skills, as you can see on this one, which says right there in red, it deals piercing damage. Piercing damage ignores armor. So as you just saw, damage went through to the hit points, it did not care about the armor at all. But these are very few and rare, especially if you compare them to the other skills you might have. Now, as I said, this is a simple concept to grasp, but it's very important for a couple of other things that I also want to mention. Most skills in the game are going to have some sort of secondary effect. And let me use Chloroform as my go-to example here because I like this a lot. Chloroform destroys magic armor and then tries to set sleeping. It says tries because if you notice the blue lines, the last blue line says resisted by magic armor. This doesn't mean that if the enemy has magic armor, this does nothing. What this means is if you throw it at somebody that still has magic armor, the damage part still goes through, but the secondary effect, which was to set him to sleep, does not apply. So if you want to apply it, you first, once more, need to break through their magic armor. And this should be enough, yep. So now we broke the armor and we set to sleep. So this is true for pretty much any other skill in the game. A fireball, for example, sets burning, but it only sets burning if he has no magic armor. A poison dart can poison an enemy. It will only poison if they don't have magic armor. Entangle, same thing. We just saw Chloroform, lightning spells. All of these things that apply something else will only work if the corresponding armor type is gone. Generally speaking, if you are casting an elemental spell, magic armor is what resists it. And if you are dealing physical damage, physical armor is what resists it. There are also some spells which do physical damage and also get resisted by physical armor. And then there are some exceptions to this, where you have some spells which deal magic damage, but their secondary effect is resisted by physical armor. Impalement, what I have right here, is an example of this. So this is very important because in this game, and pretty much any turn-based game, crowd control, disabling effects are very, very important. And I would say that if you want to be successful in combat while playing this game, especially if you go for the higher difficulties, you should use a lot of disabling effects. It is very, very important. But you can only apply them if you have destroyed the corresponding magic armor. It's very annoying to cast something like this to then not have the effect go through because they still had enough armor to defend against it. On the topic of different armor types and different damage types, this takes me into the next thing I want to talk about, which is party composition. Now, naturally, your party composition is going to affect how the game plays out for you, especially in terms of combat. And I want to cover this topic primarily talking about three things, which are efficiency, balance, and enjoyment of the game. Now, I bring up efficiency, and it's also why I wanted to talk about armor types and damage types before covering this topic. Because if you want to be as efficient as possible in combat in this game, you would want to have everybody in your party focusing on the same thing. Let's look at a very basic example. You have an enemy that has 100 points of physical armor and 100 points of magic armor. If you want to kill that enemy by bringing his hit points to 0, and you have one person that can only deal physical damage, that person needs to break 100 points of physical armor before reaching the hit points. Similarly, if you have someone in your party that can only deal magical damage, that person would also need to take care of 100 points of armor before reaching the hit points. This is redundant. It's a waste of resources, action points, and damage, because you essentially are having to break 200 points of armor before reaching the hit points, whereas if everybody was focusing on the same damage type, for example physical, everybody would be breaking physical armor, so you only have to worry about 100 points of armor before reaching the hit points. So it would be more efficient. This is also why you see a lot of people online talking about if you want to be good at this game, if you want to improve in combat, you would need to have a party where everybody is a dedicated physical damage dealer. I don't like this idea and I don't recommend this idea at all. And I'm gonna explain why. Is it more efficient? Yes, for the reason I just covered. Is it also a much more brute force approach where you don't need as much strategy? Yes, because you don't have to care if, let's say, the enemy... You don't have to care, for example, if the enemy is more resistant to one type of magic than another, or he might even be immune to one. You don't care. All you care is physical damage, so you just brute force damage on top of the enemy and they will eventually die. Right? So it's a much simpler approach to the game as well. Now, I do think, however, that if you want to have a more balanced approach, and as a result, a more enjoyable time playing this game, where you get to explore more of what the game has to offer, learn through that variety, and making yourself a better player in the process, I think you want to have people in your party capable of doing different things. And as an example, you have this screen right here. I am playing this playthrough in Tactician difficulty as well as in Honor mode, and I have a split party. I have 2 people focusing primarily on physical damage, 2 people focusing primarily on spellcasting, and I'm doing just fine. You don't need to have a party focusing only in one thing. I think it's gonna cut out a lot of what the game has to offer, and it's gonna be a less fun experience, and you will learn less and improve less while playing the game that way. So with that, what would actually be my recommendation for a party composition, because I know a lot of people like to ask me this. My recommendation is not very different than what you are seeing right now. I greatly enjoy having a party where 2 people are focusing mostly on physical damage and 2 people are focusing on spellcasting. Now, it doesn't need to be a party exactly the same as this one, right? So in my case, I have one spellcaster focusing primarily on pyrokinetic and geomancer, so that's fire and earth spells. I have one spellcaster focusing on air and water, and also a lot of support. Then I have a physical damage dealer, which is more on the tanky side with sword and board, and I have another physical damage dealer in the form of an archer. Now, I think this is a very balanced party. It is a party that will do well during the entire course of the game, and there will be nothing in the entire game that you cannot take care of. So let's say, for example, that you had a party that was all physical damage. If you were to meet a physical immune enemy, which I think is extremely rare, thankfully, but if that happened, you might just get stuck, and you won't be able to take care of him in a normal way, let's say. The same thing applies if you go full magic. If you go full magic and you find someone that's immune to magic, then you're kind of screwed as well. So by having variety, by having diversity in what you can do, you can take care of every single challenge. Does your enemy have a tremendous amount of magic armor but low physical armor? I would focus my physical damage dealers on him. Is it the other way around? I would then focus my spellcasters on him. So you can approach this in very different ways. Also, let's say the enemy is immune to fire. Not to worry. I have someone capable of dealing other damage types, even if it's just elemental, and I also have physical damage available. So you can complement your party with different damage types, and you can help each other, and you can always take care of anything the game throws at you in this way. Now, what I also want to bring up here is that I would not recommend making characters which are purely focused on a single type of damage. Let's think about a physical damage dealer. I have Sybil here, which I made an archer. I could have built her in such a way that she only has access to physical damage. But I don't like that, because if I need some help in terms of dealing magic damage to help out my friends here, my spellcasters, she would not be useful there. That's why I like to complement her and complement all of my characters with additional things to do. So in her case, being an archer, we have access to arrows. So I have a bunch of elemental arrows that if I need to do some kind of damage, magic damage of any type, I am able to provide and help my party in that way. On that same note, even Beast, who is more of a melee tank, he also has access to spells to deal magical damage. He has access to a couple of summons which deal magical damage. There are multiple ways that you can find damage to help your other friends. Even if we're thinking about, let's say, for example, grenades, which can also deal elemental damage. You can also use this to help your spellcasters. And on that same note, I like to build my spellcasters with access to at least some form of physical damage. So even if it's coming from spells, stuff like teleportation deals physical damage. Necromancy spells deal physical damage. So even if my character is primarily, let's say, a pyrokinetic geomancer, I also give him points in necromancer so that he can help out my physical damage dealers if we do need physical damage. So your characters, all in all, should be flexible and should be able to help your other companions even if it's not their primary focus. And I'm gonna cover this more when I go about how to build your character. So one more thing I wanted to cover in terms of party composition, and that is if you want to include in your party an undead character. So you can see an example right here. I have 3 living characters in my party, and then I have Fane, which is undead. Now, for the majority of things, this doesn't affect that much, but there is one thing that you need to constantly remember and pay attention to, and that is undead characters do not heal in the same way that living characters do. So if I want to heal a living character, I would cast a spell that restores vitality, such as Restoration or, for example, Healing Ritual. However, if you restore vitality on an undead, it actually deals physical damage, as you saw right there. And it's not a small amount either, this is a lot of damage. So it's happened to me before, it's happened to other people before as well, it's quite funny to see. But sometimes, unfortunately, also, this nearly went bad, that you may find yourself in a situation where your undead character is taking a lot of damage, you need to heal, you will see a healing potion in your hotbar, and you click it and you die. Or you try to heal your character with a restoration spell, and you end up killing him as well. So, the main thing here that I want to say is, it's a lot easier to manage your party if everybody is of the same type as well. So if everybody is alive or if everybody is dead, you can support them all in the same way, rather than having to remember and make exceptions for that one guy that you can't do it on. So just for you to know as well, the way you heal undead is by dealing poison damage to them. But actually, before I do that, since I have my bar like this, I also wanted to mention, this is also very useful if you are fighting undead enemies. And these are actually a quite common type of enemy in the game, because you can deal tremendous amounts of damage on undead creatures just by using your healing spells. And there's the example. I took out all of Fane's physical armor and nearly killed him with a single level 1 AP restoration spell. It does a lot of damage to undead. But yeah, like I was saying, if you want to heal undead, you need to actually apply poison on them, which normally would hurt your characters, as you just saw Beast take some damage there. This will heal undead. On that same note, do not toss poison into undead enemies, because you are going to be healing them rather than hurting them. Alright, let's talk about how to build your character. Now, I covered this briefly when talking about party composition, in that I like people in my party to be able to do different things, but I also want each and every person in my party to be able to be flexible and adapt to different situations which are going to come up during gameplay. Now, this might mean adapting to different enemy types, it might mean providing assistance to your party with different damage types, be it physical or magical, or maybe even different types of magical elements, debuffing your enemies, disabling your enemies, or even providing help to your party by casting buffs, heals, whatever might be necessary. And the best way to achieve this is in how you build your character, building your character in certain ways. So let's use Fane here as a mere example of what I'm trying to illustrate. Fane, in this party, in this playthrough, is primarily a spellcaster. He is someone that I started building from the wizard preset for no reason other than I like playing with pyrokinetic and geomancer spells together. I think they work out quite well, especially for the purpose of dealing damage. If you look at my skills over here, you can also quickly tell that these are indeed my primary schools of focus. I have more points invested in Geomancer and Pyrokinetic than I do in anything else. But you will also notice that I also have points invested into other types of skills. Skills which you might think have nothing to do or don't synergize well with Pyrokinetic or Geomancer spells, or they might not even have anything to do at all with spellcasting. And they might not have. But what this allows you to do is, by just having a small investment in different skills, you will be able to learn skills and spells from those schools, which can be very, very powerful tools, which serve you well during the entire course of the game, and that you can get very early on as well. So, I mentioned this because something I see a lot of people doing, especially new players, and I did this myself when I started playing this game, is that when you have a good notion of what you want your character to be, and let's use this as an example, let's say I want my character to be a Geomancer and Pyrokinetic, whenever you level up, people are putting all their points in Geomancer and Pyrokinetic, ignoring all of the other skills. Because they might think that these don't really complement what they're doing here. And what this does is, you are going to be dealing more damage with your Geomancer and Pyrokinetic spells, but, in my opinion, you are cutting out the potential of your character by a tremendous amount. Being able to complement your skill set with things from other schools makes you a much more versatile character, much more powerful, both for yourself as well as for your entire party. Now, I will give a couple of examples next about some really powerful skills you can get early on for a very small investment, but just so you have a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about here, if you focus on Geomancer and Pyrokinetic, you might not have access to certain things. So, if I want to heal somebody by casting a restoration spell that restores vitality, I don't have access to that. If I want to restore magical armor, I can't do that. If I want to teleport somebody away, I can't do that either, because all of those things are not present in these two schools of magic of Pyrokinetic and Geomancer. But if, let's say, I just put a single point in Scoundrel, now I have access to a very powerful disabling spell. This is a type of effect that I would never be able to do when playing only with Pyrokinetic or Geomancer. I would also gain access to something like Adrenaline for that same point in Scoundrel. Very powerful buff as well. Let's say that Losa, which is more of an Hydrosophist Aerothurge, is casting rain on my enemies, making them wet. I can help her out in stunning those enemies or electrifying her surfaces by having some points in Aerothurge that allows me to cast lightning spells also. So this gives you access to things that otherwise you would not be able to do. You want to complement your party with physical damage. By having necromancer spells, you can do that. So in my opinion, the best way to build your characters, and a way which I find is going to make you better at playing the game as well and learn more, is by giving them some variety, making them be more flexible in what they can do. The other thing I also want to mention is that in terms of how and when you level these things up, I would definitely prioritize putting points in skills that you want to be able to cast before you start putting points in certain skills just for the purpose of doing more damage. Because having access to different tools is going to make you a much better character for your party than just dealing 5% more damage with your earth spells. So I would always start by putting points in the requirements I need, and I'm talking about this because, let's say, Hydrosophist, if I want to cast Armor of Frost or learn it, I need to have Hydrosophist 1. So I would put my points to meet those requirements before focusing on just getting points for more damage. The other thing I want to talk about, but it's a lot simpler, is in terms of attributes. Now, these are actually quite simple and you don't really have to think too much about this. So, strength if you want to do damage with strength-based weapons, finesse if you want to do damage with finesse-based weapons. Examples: beast is melee, 35 strength, Sibyl is finesse, finesse. There's not much to say about here. And if you are a spellcaster, you typically want intelligence. So these three are very simple. You want more damage with a certain thing, you put points there. Constitution, I would typically not invest a lot of points on. Even Beast here as my melee character that's more tanky, I don't care too much about Constitution, because you might have more hit points, it might allow you to survive a little bit longer, but honestly, if you get your armor broken, you are susceptible to being disabled, which means you are likely out of the fight anyway. So more Constitution is not gonna do much for you. Now, memory is an important thing to think about, because memory is also a type of attribute which people might associate a lot with spellcasters and not want to put points in physical damage dealers. That's not how you should approach this. You should think of memory simply as you look at the skills available in the game, you learn whichever ones you want, and you decide what you want to be able to cast in any given situation in combat. And then you basically put points in memory until you have the necessary slots to be able to do whatever you want to do. You might put more points, you might put less points, depending on the character, depending on what they're supposed to do, if they are more support focused, if they are more damage focused. This really is going to depend on what your character, or what you want to do with your character, and you will need to decide what you want to do with it. But memory is an important stat to level up quickly, because there's nothing worse than being able to learn new spells and wanting to cast new spells and skills, but you can't do it because you don't have enough memory slots. So yeah, memory, you level up according to what you want to cast. Wits is also a very important attribute. Now, this increases critical chance, initiative, and detection of traps and hidden stuff, sure. The most important part here, in my opinion, is the initiative. In turn-based games, if you are able to act first, you have a massive advantage. So, this is actually a type of attribute which everybody in your party can put points on, and you are going to be well served by it. You want to put more points in wits, especially if you want a particular character to go first. Let's say it's a character that buffs your other characters, or maybe sets up the battlefield for you. You might want that character to go first. So putting points in wits for that reason is useful. So I think this pretty much covers what I want to talk about in terms of how to build your character. We can look at a few more examples here. So let's say we look at Beast, who is melee oriented and physical damage. He has strength, he has a lot of memory for casting what I want, and then he also has wits to try and go first. In terms of combat abilities, as I mentioned before, I have 0 points in any of this, because they are not as valuable as what we have here. His primary focus is in warfare, this is where most of his damage is coming from, but then we also have points in other things like Scoundrel for the same reasons before, Chloroform, Adrenaline. You might have points in Polymorph for some really cool spells as well. Necromancer because I want to cast something like Bone Cage for physical armor or Shackles of Pain. You know, Aerothurge for teleportation. It's the same thing as I talked about before, right? You want to have your primary focus, but you want to be able to be versatile and help out your party in different ways. And this is going to be true for everybody in my party, as you can see right here. Sybil is an archer. She still has points in Aerothurge. She has points in Geomancer, Pyrokinetic, Scoundrel, what have you. And the same thing goes for Lohse. She's primarily an Hydrosophist Aerothurge, but she still has points in other schools of magic to help out the party in different ways. Okay, so to complement how to build your character, let me show you guys a couple of really cool skills which I find to be very important, and they are very effective, that you can get even from very early in the game, and they will serve you well all the way up until the final boss in the game. So let's look at our spellbook here from Fane, and I'm gonna start talking about Chloroform, because it will also allow me to talk about something else which is also important. Chloroform is a finesse skill. It requires a single point in Scoundrel. It only costs 1 action point, so it's very efficient. You can cast it from stealth, it does not reveal you, it breaks magic armor, and it sets the enemy to sleep. So, it's a very, very efficient skill that does a lot, and your requirement, your investment to be able to learn and cast this is a single point in Scoundrel. This is one of those perfect examples of it being very, very much worth it to get 1 point in a school that basically means nothing for your primary schools, which in this case would be Pyrokinetic and Geomancer, because it's going to give you access to some very powerful tools. Now, sleeping an enemy, or let's rephrase, disabling an enemy is one of the most powerful things you can do in a game like this, and I do think it's one of the primary keys for success in combat in this game. Because the way this works, and let me talk a little bit about here about, you know, turn-based combat and rounds. When you start combat, everybody involved in combat is going to have 1 turn per round under normal circumstances. So essentially, you get your turn, you play, other people get their turns, and then when the round is over, we get a new round where people can go again. So if you disable somebody, that means they are going to lose their turn. This is massive. This changes combat greatly. It's one of the reasons why I'm gonna reference crowd control spells, even if I am not incorporating them in these more generic useful skills, but I really do want to make a note of and reinforce the idea that crowd control spells, disabling spells, are very, very important and extremely powerful to use in this game. Chloroform does just that. It puts somebody to sleep, which means that character is going to lose their next turn for a single action point, and this is extremely good. So, like I said, it's a finesse skill. Fane is not a finesse character. I don't care. It's worth getting. If we look at Beast, again, he has it. He doesn't use finesse. Sybil does use finesse, but yeah, she has it also, and Lohse has it also. Everybody has this, even though they don't really care much about Scoundrel skill. Another example also from Scoundrel is Adrenaline. So again, it only requires a single point in Scoundrel, it costs nothing, and it immediately gives you 2 action points to use. The downside being, you lose 2 action points when you start your next turn. Now, you may think this is not very good because it's, you know, you don't gain anything, right? You get 2, you lose 2, that's 0. But a turn-based game, going first and being able to do as much as possible as you can in your initial turns in combat, especially if you can do it before the enemy has a chance to play, is going to lead to very, very good results. It can drastically change the fight, because those 2 additional action points might just be enough to kill a character, or break his entire armor and then enable you to put him to sleep, for example. Or even just support the character by healing them or buffing them or whatever. These 2 action points you gain for quote-unquote free are very, very powerful. And you also get them from that same point in Scoundrel. It is, once again, one of those skills that everybody can make use of. It just is. I will have this on every single character in every single playthrough that I play if I want to have my characters be efficient. It is very, very good. Next up, we have Tactical Retreat. Now, this one does require a little bit more investment. It requires 2 points in Huntsman. And this is a mobility skill. Basically, this teleports you to a position, like so, right? And once you get there, it hastes you. Now, there are several mobility skills in the game, but this is the best one, because it is going to haste you on your following turn. And again, turn-based game, action economy is very important. Being able to be efficient with your action points is massively powerful for your performance in the game. So, another example, if you want to go from here to there, this might mean you're gonna spend 4 action points, because in this game there's not a separation between movement points and action points. You just need to spend your action points to move. So going over there might mean you have to spend all of your action points. But if you use this, you only spend 1 action point, and in the next turn you get it back because you're hasted. So it's very, very efficient, very, very powerful. Not only that, you might be next to a character that can deal attacks of opportunity. If you try to run away from him, you are going to get attacked. If you blink, you don't. Not only that, you might be allowed to blink into an otherwise unreachable position, like the other side of a bridge, or on top of a cliff to get you high ground. So the utility that something like this has is endless. It is very important that everybody in your party has a mobility skill of this style, and I very much recommend Tactical Retreat. So there is only 1 person in the party that does not have it. So I have it. Los has it. Sabil has it. Beast does not. Beast has Phoenix Dive, which is a similar ability, but it does not haste him at the end, so it's a little bit worse. The reason why I don't give him Tactical Retreat is because he basically benefits nothing from Huntsman, because he's melee, he's not really going to be fighting from high ground, so those 2 points would be a little bit too much of an investment for him to gain not very much from it, because we have access to something like Phoenix Dive. But make sure everybody in your party has a mobility skill, and I strongly recommend Tactical Retreat, especially if it's some kind of ranged character. Next up, let me see if I have something that pops out. Of course, right. Teleportation. So teleportation might just be the best spell in the entire game. What this spell does is very simple. You teleport something or someone into a different position. That's it, right? But it will deal physical damage to that character. It can deal physical damage to another character or multiple ones if it lands on top of them, as you see right there. And it's going to displace the positioning of your enemies. And that cannot be understated. If you have a bunch of enemies scattered around, one of the more powerful things you can do is teleport them into a pile, so that then you can just be more efficient with your damage, because you can AoE them all down instead of having to worry about single targeting each and every one of them while they are far away. Not only that, there are also very powerful disabling spells, such as freezing your enemies with ice, And there's multiple ways of doing that, stunning them with lightning, stuff like that. And if they're clumped up, you can disable 3, 4, 5 enemies at once, rather than just trying to disable one at a time, which is much more inefficient. So again, it's a skill that requires 2 points in Aerosurge, but everybody has it. Even Beast that doesn't care about Aerosurge at all. Teleportation is it's just the best spell in the game. Period. Everybody has this. I make use of it in every single combat. Make sure everybody has it. It's just very much worth it. These, I think, are really the main ones, and you can get them very early on, and they're very generically useful that pretty much anybody in your party can make very good use of them. Other things I can also recommend are stuff like Restoration. It's one Hydrosophist, you get access to Restoration, Rain, Armor of Frost, and all these things can be very useful regardless of who is casting it. Because Rain, you can douse fire, you can remove burning from your party, you can create a water puddle, which can be very useful, you can stun someone who is shocked, you can freeze someone who is chilled, all with a single AP and 1 point in Hydrosophist. Armor of Frost, again, single point of AP, really good support spell. If you have the space for it, take it. It's gonna help you out a lot. Other stuff that you can put as well, I wouldn't put this on everybody, but definitely, I usually put it on more than one person. Something like Haste. Again, 1 Pyrokinetic, only cost 1 AP, really efficient, really good. Same thing with Peace of Mind. Stuff like this is invaluable at times, and it doesn't cost much at all to use these. So I recommend going for stuff like this, making sure your characters have these really cool spells, which is definitely gonna make them more versatile and more adaptable to whatever may come, and they will be able to support their party all that much better. So I nearly forgot, but I still want to reference a couple of other really powerful skills, especially if we're talking about melee characters, and these are from the Polymorph school. Now, same deal as before, the other ones we covered. These you can get very, very early in the game, and they only have a single point of requirement in Polymorph. We have Tentacle Lash, which hits an opponent for a massive amount of physical damage. It really does a lot, especially if you are focusing on strength. And if you want to compare, so this one deals around 450 damage. If we compare with Crippling Blow, which is another physical skill, it's basically double damage. This one deals around 220. So it is very, very hard hitting. It has a little bit of range, it has 8 meters, so you don't even really need to be in actual melee with the target. And if you are able to go through physical armor, you are going to atrophy that target. An atrophied character cannot attack during its turn. So it's not a hard disable, as let's say a stun, but they still can't attack, it's pretty debilitating. And depending on the enemy type, especially if you focus on, let's say, a fighter or an archer, something like that, if they don't have access to magic, they can't really do much else. So you are kind of taking them out of the fight. Very, very strong. Chicken Claw, same deal. Only 1 point in Polymorph. You can also get this at level 1, just like Tentacle Lash. You turn your target into a chicken for 2 turns. So this is a hard disable, because your character is going to be turning into a chicken and just kind of wandering around aimlessly. And it lasts for 2 turns, which is very strong. Now, the cool part about this as well is that the point you spend in Polymorph is never wasted, because when you put a point in Polymorph, you can then put a point into one of your main attributes, like Strength, Intelligence, whatever you may need. So it's also a pretty cool feature of putting points into Polymorph. I am referencing these as mostly for a melee character, because these are spells that work on melee range. So not something I would really put on, people fighting from afar, spellcasters. Although, if I have the slots to spare, I could put it on someone like, for example, my archer. So, if somebody is able to walk up to my archer and start meleeing him, if I can break his armor, this is also a cool way to save my archer, or, you know, just disable that target for a little bit of time. So, really cool abilities, all the way from level 1 until the end of the game. They are going to be very, very powerful. Okay, so let's now talk about surfaces and also interactions between different elements. This is one of those very unique takes that this game does, I think, better than most, and it makes combat and just overall, you know, interacting with the environment a lot more fun. So to exemplify, I created a water puddle over here, which, you know, you can find naturally throughout the game if you're like near a river or something. You may find an oil puddle, you may find blood, you may find a bunch of different things, but I'll exemplify with water, and I can also exemplify with oil. We can create an oil puddle by using impalement, which I guess also goes to show you how you can create said surfaces. And then you can kind of just use common sense to, you know, explore, experiment, and see what you can get out of these things. So we have water, and we also have access to lightning spells. So water and electricity is going to make electrified water. So anybody walking on this surface is going to take lightning damage as they move through it. It's a very cool thing to do. If you have a bunch of different enemies in a specific area, you can just do something like cast rain on top of them, electrify the area, and everybody is gonna get damaged, getting shocked, maybe even getting stunned as they walk through that region. Not only that, something else we can also do with water, there are multiple options. We can use a water spell, especially one that chills or is more on the ice side of things, like for example Winter Blast. You cast this on water, it's going to turn that water into an ice surface, which has a chance of knocking people down. And we covered crowd control before. Knocking somebody down means they have to spend their next turn getting back up, which is going to consume their entire turn. And also, very importantly, getting knocked down from ice does not care about your armor at all. You can disable somebody with full armor by having them slip on ice. What else can you do? You can experiment and find stuff to do basically, but you can toss fire on a surface of water, you're going to evaporate it and create a cloud, and then you can electrify the cloud as well. People also take damage while walking on this cloud. Clouds can also hinder line of sight. There's just a lot that you can do with multiple different surfaces. You can set fire to oil puddles, blowing everything up and now having a fire surface, so anybody walking on that area is gonna get burned and is going to apply burning on them as well. So yeah, you have you have a lot of different options, and I encourage you guys to experiment with this. And there's really a lot of ways of doing it. Like I said, you can just find puddles of water during a combat encounter because it's part of the environment. You may find barrels filled with water, filled with poison, filled with oil, and use those as well by breaking them or throwing them or whatever you may want to do. There's really a lot of interactions you can have with the environment and even with surfaces that you create that are going to be very, very handy. Since we are talking about interactions between different elements and providing cool effects, I want to mention a couple of important ones as well, especially because these are things you can do from very early in the game and once again are going to serve you well during the entire game. Now, as you see, we talked about this before, most spells like to apply some type of secondary status. We see right here this spell does damage but also applies shocked. So a shocked character has one less AP on their turn, which is already pretty cool. But if you apply wet on a shocked character, they instead get stunned, which means they will instead lose their entire turn, which is, once again, very, very powerful. Similar to that, if you are able to chill a target, and they are chilled, and you also apply wet on them, or you deal more ice damage on them, instead they will get frozen, which means they will also lose their turn. So even something as simple as using this level 1 spell, shocking somebody, and then casting rain on them can disable that enemy or even a group of enemies if they are standing in a nearby position and take them out of the fight for a full turn. There are other combinations you can try out, like we saw before. Oil and fire, poison and fire can lead to explosions, can lead to more damage. But the ones I really find to be the most interesting and, you know, more effective are the ones that disable enemies. So I do think playing around with Hydrosophist magic and Aerothurge magic is very powerful in that sense. Now I want to give some generic tips, things that are kind of minor but they can help you out a lot when you are playing the game. And the first one I'm going to mention is the bedroll. And the bedroll is an item that you can find throughout the game, very early in the game. You can pick these up and put them in your inventory. And they might seem like they're not particularly useful because if you look at the item it doesn't really say much. It's not expensive or anything. But what this does is, if you are away from enemies and you just click on it, it will instantly restore all of your vitality and even apply a rested bonus which is going to it's going to protect you from certain effects and also buff certain stats that you have. So this is really helpful to have. I spent a vast majority of my time when starting out this game where after a fight I had to apply restoration to all of my party members and then wait for the cooldown to heal them again, not knowing that bedroll is just amazing for this. One more thing I want to show, which might not be obvious either, is that when you move in this game, you have one character selected and then everybody else follows you. But you can actually split your party by dragging and dropping their portraits so that they are split up. This means you can move your characters independently and position them however you want without having to worry about people following you around or doing something that you don't want. So that's just a basic thing, but I guess kind of easy to miss sometimes. So that's why I'm referencing it. And one final thing, which, I mean, you guys can judge if you think this is too cheesy for you or not. I think it's a bit cheesy, but I want to show this here. Let's say I buff Thane with haste. You can see my buff is wearing out because it lasts for 2 turns, and you know, turns are represented by a certain amount of time when you are just playing in real time in the game world. However, if you are speaking with somebody, even if it's an enemy, and you buff the person who is speaking, time is frozen for them. So your buffs do not wear off while this character is speaking. You might think this is silly, but why is this useful? Because if you want to pre-buff for a fight coming up, you can't really do it, right? Because if I'm pre-buffing Sibyl and I want to have, let's say, Flash Sacrifice, and I want to have Haste, and now I also want to have Peace of Mind, and I want to have Elemental Arrowheads. Oh, my first buff went away, my second buff is about to go away. So you can't really pre-buff very effectively before a fight because your buffs are constantly counting down. But if somebody is speaking, and a lot of combat encounters in this game start with some kind of conversation. So what you can do, and what I have a lot of success with, is you pick your tankiest character, the one most likely to withstand punishment, and you send him to start that conversation. And when that conversation starts, you buff him to hell and back. You give him magic armor, you give him physical armor, you give him haste, you give him peace of mind, you give him rested, you give him whatever you can think of. So he has all the buffs in the entire game. And then, when combat starts, even if he doesn't go first, and the enemies are gonna wail on him, he is very well protected. Even if it's just him, you can have him in the front, taking the attention of the enemies, while the rest of your unbuffed party is maybe hiding, or maybe is sitting in a high ground position, stuff like that. So, it's a cool little trick you can use if you want to have pre-buffs on at least one character in your party. Like I said, a bit cheesy. I don't think it makes a lot of sense that the game works the way it does. But it is an option that you have in case you want to use it. And one final tip I have for you is regarding spellcasters. When I started playing the game first, one of the most frequent things that would happen to me is that my spellcasters would get killed very, very quickly and very easily. And that's because I was focusing on having, for example, two wands, because you can dual wield wands, or I would have a staff, or blah blah blah, which would mean they would not have a lot of armor, because their items also don't really provide as much armor as, for example, strength-based armor would. If you want to make your casters tankier and survive longer, give them a shield. There's nothing in the game preventing you from equipping a shield on your spellcasters. This is a very simple and easy way to get a massive boost to your defenses, and honestly, you don't lose a lot. Because once you have a couple of spells, you're no longer auto-attacking in a fight. You're just not. You're gonna be casting spells. So it doesn't really matter all that much if you have one or two wands, because you're just gonna be casting spells for damage. And I do find it to be much more valuable to have your character stay alive than, you know, doing a lot of damage but being dead. This is especially relevant if you start upping the difficulties, or if you are playing in honor mode. I basically don't play without shields on my spellcasters. Alright, so we are now in a much uglier place, and we're gonna use this to talk about world exploration as well as level differences between your party and enemy groups. Now, this is important to cover because this game, the exploration in this game is very open and very free. You will have constantly, in pretty much every act, very large areas to explore, and there's nothing really, you know, gating your progress from one place to the other. You can more or less freely just walk over any place you like. Which means you might end up being, let's say, level 10 and finding yourself in a level 12 or a level 13 area. And you might think that a small level difference doesn't make much of a difference, but in this game it really does. If you have, let's say, a party level 10 and you find an enemy group of level 11, it's not going to be a fight similar to what you would have with a group of people of your same level. It can mean a much higher challenge, especially one you're not expecting. And this is exacerbated even more as you level up throughout the game. The higher the level you are, the more that this is evident. So, a lot of the time what can happen is you start exploring the game world, you end up in an area that's higher level than you, and you start dying over and over again, and you start getting frustrated because you don't know what you're doing wrong, when in fact you just really shouldn't be there yet. I don't particularly like the way that this is done in the game, but it is what it is, so let's talk a little bit about that and how you can avoid it. Because of course, without playing the game first, you don't know where you should go next, right? You can have some clues in your quest log and such, but you don't know where to go next. So my suggestion for this, besides using the magical powers of quick save and quick load, is when you reach a new area that you are unfamiliar with, start looking for NPCs. If you find enemies, then it's gonna just be a lot more obvious, but even if you just find neutral or friendly NPCs, such as we see right here, look at the level they are. So these guys are level 15. If I look over here, level 15, level 15, level 15. Even sometimes corpses on the ground have their own levels and they're also level 15. Now this is a very strong indicator that this area as a whole is for at least level 15. My recommendation is do not go into an area that is higher level than you, because you might end up having a very bad time. I think in order to have the, you know, the smoothest approach, you always want to tackle areas and enemies that are at your level or below your level if at all possible. If it's not possible, then of course look for the least amount of difference in levels between you and the enemies and start going for those. So essentially, when you find an area that is at your level, I would say try and concentrate on taking care of everything that that area has to offer. Speak with all of the NPCs, pick up all of the main quests, side quests, optional quests, maybe find groups of random enemies in the area to take care of. Just get all the little bits of experience you can get from that area before moving on to the next one. I do think it's the best approach, and it's gonna save you from frustrating encounters in areas you shouldn't be at the time. Something which is also very important when you are starting a fight, especially if you are unfamiliar with the enemies in the region, is you can right click the NPCs, let me make sure okay, and press examine. If you have lore master on your characters, or at least one character, which is why I say I always like to have one with high lore, you can examine your enemies and learn about them. So you can see if they have any immunities. This guy, for example, has none. You can see their resistances, so he's gonna take less damage from fire and from earth, but he will take 100% from everything else. You can see which talents he has. So this guy, for example, has opportunist, so he's gonna attack opportunity if you try to run past him. And then you can also learn other stuff like his level, vitality, physical armor, magic armor. If he is like a spellcaster, you can kind of tell what spells he has access to, how much damage he will deal, chance to block, initiative, blah blah blah. You can learn all of these things about your enemies before you start the fight, or even after the fight started, because you can do this during the fight. The most important part about this, for me, is immunities and resistances. And I say this because... let me see if I can actually... yeah, so let's look at Fane as an example. Fane is immune to bleeding, drunk, and suffocating. And he also is resistant by 200% to poison. Now, this exists because he is undead. An undead character cannot bleed, he cannot get drunk, he cannot suffocate, and he heals from poison. We saw before, he heals from poison. So, this is what's important to check on your enemies, especially if you are considering using crowd control, disabling effects on them. There's nothing worse than using a skill like, let's say, for example, chloroform, trying to sleep an enemy and then find out that he is immune to sleep. Or, let's say you use a very costly spell like Laser Ray, costing 3 action points to try and deal massive damage to an enemy, and then find out that the guy is completely resistant to fire, or even worse, he may even heal from fire damage. Because if the resistance is up to 100%, then the damage is reduced all the way until 0. But if it's above 100%, then it starts healing. They will actually heal from that damage. That's the reason why if I hit Fane with poison, he will heal instead of taking damage. So make sure you examine your enemies, know what you are up against, and use skills and spell schools and elements appropriately to not waste your resources. Another topic which is also very, very important for combat and is applicable to pretty much every fight in the game is how you should engage in fights and how you should position your party. Now, as I mentioned, I apologize for this, this is the only save game that I have. It's my honor mode playthrough right now, so I can't really show something live happening here, but you have multiple examples in my channel already. If you look at the playthrough, there will be fights pretty much every episode. But let's use this neutral area here as an example. Now, let's imagine that these guys over here and these guys over here are enemies. Okay? So you could do something like you want to start a fight, so you basically walk in through this region here and just walk into the area until they spot you, and then the fight starts. This is what I would call a terrible choice. And it's a terrible choice for multiple reasons, and let's look at them one by one. So the first terrible thing about this is you would be starting a fight where all of your characters are clumped up. You're all in a tight group. This might seem like a good idea because there are certain spells in the game, I'm gonna give you an example here, like Favorable Wind, which says your speed and your allies within a certain range get a buff. So it incentivizes you to be close together. You might have something like Mend Metal. People around you regenerate physical armor, stuff like this. But generally speaking, and especially at the start of a fight, being bunched up is a very, very bad thing. Especially if the enemy group has spellcasters. It's bad in any circumstance, but it's especially bad versus spellcasters. Because a melee character like this guy right here, I can pretty much guarantee this two-handed guy would just walk over in this area and do a whirlwind, doing a massive amount of damage to everybody in the region. And if you have a spellcaster, let's say up here, which she most likely is, yep, she is, you would start getting impalement, AoE spells, fireballs in your face, where everybody is gonna get damaged very efficiently by the enemy. So you do not want to start a fight where you are clumped up. There are certain exceptions to this, especially if you can clump up but in a favorable position where you have, let's say, a lot of high ground and the enemies can't even reach you. That you can do, but generally speaking, you do not want to clump up. So, very bad situation right there. The other terrible thing, I'm gonna call these things terrible now, is you are fighting versus people on higher ground than you. This, again, is awful. It's awful because you are going to have less range to hit these enemies. You will have line of sight issues, because you might be looking up, but you have the wall in front, so your shots might not go through. So you see right there, interrupted. And you also deal less damage because you are on low ground. So you have less range, you are gonna have more line of sight issues, and you are gonna be dealing less damage. All the while the enemy has the opposite effect. He is gonna have more range over you, he is gonna have better line of sight, and he will also be dealing more damage. So it's, once again, a terrible situation for you to be fighting in. And the other final thing that I want to mention is everybody is exposed. So your enemies are going to know right from the start where everybody is. So what I suggest when you spot a fight, there are times where you cannot spot a fight because it's an ambush or something like that. Sometimes you can look for clues like, okay, this might be an ambush, let me prepare for this. But you can also use the magic powers of quick save and quick load, of course, if you want. But if you spot a fight, try to position your party in a way that's favorable for you. And one of the most important things to do that is learn how to split your characters, because by default they're all chained together, and if one moves, everybody moves. And what you can do is you can simply drag and drop your character away from the others, and you see the chain right there, which is going to take him out of that chain. This means right now this character moves independently from the other ones. So what you can do is you spot a fight, you sneak by pressing C or by doing, I think, toggle action sneak, and you can see the line of sight of the enemies. So you know, for example, that if you walk all the way up here, nobody is spotting you. And when the fight starts, you are hidden, which can give you a big advantage. So you can do something like this, where you split your party, and you start putting people in favorable positions. So I could have Losa on that corner, I could have Sybil on this corner, I could have Fane, let's say, in this area over here, or more close to this corner, depending on enemy line of sight. And then I can start the fight with my tankier character. And it's also cool if this character has a lot of initiative, because it means once he gets spotted and the fight starts, he is likely to go first. So he would get the attention, enemies would focus on him, and all the while you can have your hidden characters move around freely, because when the fight starts and they are hidden, they don't actually get into a combat turn immediately. You can still move them around freely. So even after the fight starts, you can reposition once more, and your first attack or first action from stealth is not going to cost you any AP. So a lot of advantages in doing this. Your party is split up, right? So there's no risk of getting AoE down, which is horrible. Most of your party is on high ground or ready to act from high ground, because we have Losa on high ground, we have Sybil on high ground, and we have Fane on high ground. And you have your tankier character taking the attention of the enemies first, which is much better than if you have a squishy target starting to get attacked by the enemies. So this is how I would suggest engaging with pretty much every fight. Of course, the situation and the opportunities you have are going to be different on each fight, because the layout of the scenario is going to be different. You need to start learning how to spot advantage points, where you can get good line of sight. Maybe you can get to a place where an enemy cannot reach very easily, and you want to exploit those advantages as much as possible. This applies to pretty much every fight, and I would definitely recommend that you start doing this for every fight as well. Okay, let's also talk about traders in this game. Now, throughout your multiple acts, you are gonna fight traders in every single act in multiple different areas, and traders are very important. Now, there's the obvious way they're important, because, you know, you can sell your stuff to them in exchange for gold. You can trade something for something else, like an item. The item can be, you know, armor, it can be weapons, it can be trinkets, it can be scrolls, consumables, skill books, blah blah blah. There's a lot of stuff you can get from traders. But I want to talk about some things which might not be very obvious to you. And the first thing is, traders are going to refresh their stock, I believe, every hour. So every hour that you spend in the game means that the trader is going to refresh their inventory. So basic example, let's say you sell a bunch of stuff and the trader has no more gold left. If you wait 1 hour, his stock is going to refresh. He will now once again have more gold, so you can get some more gold in exchange for your items. On that same note, let's say this guy has a very important spell that you want on multiple people. Like, for example, teleportation, which you definitely want. You can only buy one because he only has one copy. So if you want multiples, check back after some time, he's gonna refresh his stock and he is gonna have that item once again. So for skill books, that's the way it always works. They always have one copy, and then you can get more once they refresh their inventory. In terms of actual items like weapons and armor and stuff, they will get different items unless I believe they have unique items. Some items are unique. It says at the bottom, I can't show it, but on the bottom here it says unique. These do not change, I believe, but they will get their other items refreshed. And more importantly, their stock will also start featuring items that are at your level. So if you are level 10, for example, you will only find items for sale on that trader up to level 10. But once you level up to level 11, that merchant is now also going to sell level 11 items. which is a very important thing to note. Something else you might want to consider about traders and people that have valuable items on their inventory is that you can also pickpocket people. And you can apply this to any NPC in the game. I'm going to show an example here without actually pickpocketing, but you can do this and then just sneak around. You see the little hand icon, it says pickpocket. If you click on her, you will get the pickpocket UI, and from there you can start stealing stuff from their inventory. So why is this important? Because you can only steal from an NPC once per character. Now, I don't go through the trouble of min-maxing in that sense, where I could respec all of my characters to have max thievery, and then everybody steals as much as they can from every single person in the game. You can do it if you want. I personally don't have the patience for it. But I do rob them at least once if possible. So, since you can only rob them once per character, it's a lot more valuable if you do it when they are of a higher level, because that means you can rob items which are higher level than you could before, right? It's kind of a waste if, let's say, you reach this act, which is Act 2, at level 9, for example, and you rob everybody in the area. Sure, you get a bunch of level 9 items, but then you work your way up to, let's say, level 16, and you can't rob them again for those juicy items that are now scaled to your level. So yeah, merchants are very important. This applies to everybody, but merchants especially can be very valuable during the course of your playthrough. Something else I also wanted to mention regarding traders is what I recommend people to get first. Because it's easy to open up a trade window with a merchant, and you know, early on in the game you're not gonna find this amount of stuff, it's gonna be a lot more limited. But you might look at the items and see, oh, there's this really cool weapon over here that does more damage than my current one, I am gonna get this right now. I would recommend not doing that first. I think it's a lot more important, and again, this is especially true in the early game, where you don't have a lot of skills, where you don't have a lot of money, to invest the gold you have in purchasing new skills. Skills are going to leverage your power a lot more easily and a lot more effectively than just getting new weapons would. So stuff like I mentioned, like, you know, for example, just getting something like chloroform, getting adrenaline, getting some of those really useful support skills like restoration or armors. These things are going to carry you a lot further, especially in the early game, than just getting a new weapon that gives you a small increment in your damage. We will now discuss crafting a little bit regarding specifically skills. Now, as I mentioned before, you have a crafting system in this game which you can access by pressing G or pressing this button right here. And then you have your recipes, you have your combine screen, you have your rune screen. And one thing that's very important, and it might not be obvious to you when you start playing the game, is that you can actually gain access to more skills than the ones you see being sold or picked up as you move around throughout the world. And you can do this by combining skill books of different schools. Let me see if I can find a recipe here. Actually, it might be easier for the grimoire. Yeah, for example. So I use Corpse Explosion on my character here, which is a powerful spell, but you cannot buy this skill in the game. You need to combine a Pyrokinetic skill book with a Necromancy skill book. And this is true for pretty much every combination you can come up with. So you can try it out for yourself and you can see what comes out of it, and you will gain a skill book and learn what it does. I also have this one here, for example, which is Explosive Trap. It's by combining a Pyrokinetic skill book with the Huntsman skill book, which is also a very good skill for Thane to have here. But, like I said, you can experiment and combine and see what happens. Or, if you want, you can also just check online, Google it, and you're gonna find multiple different sites with lists explaining what all of the combinations are and how you can obtain them. So you will basically gain access to a variety of different skills that you didn't even know existed by doing these combinations in your crafting screen. Very cool, and some of these combinations can really be very, very powerful. I have an example here which, like I mentioned, I use on my pyrokinetic caster. Corpse Explosion and Explosive Trap are two very good examples of something that's very powerful, and again, they're also quite cheap, once again, efficient. So 1 AP, 1 AP, and they are very, very good. Okay, so let's give a little bit of a special attention here to a couple of skills which work somewhat differently than the majority of the other ones. And I am talking about source skills. Skills that require source points in order to be cast. So, if you look at the cost of this skill, you will see the little green circle there, which is just your regular action point. But then you also see the little blue diamond, which represents the cost of 1 source point. Now, source points are something that you have, and you can see them in this little container here. At the start of the game, you will only have 1 available. Eventually, you can get some more. But what these are used for is specifically for these types of spells which require that resource in order to be cast. Now, the way that these skills are kind of presented to you and based on the lore and story of the game, you may think that these are some kind of very special skill only to be used as a last resource type of situation, very rarely used. And I just want to tell you it's not the case at all. You can treat these as perfectly normal skills. The only change really you have here is the resources. So where normally you would spend your action points during a turn in combat to cast a spell and you would just get them back on your next turn, source points are persistent. So if you have 3 and you spend 1, you are left with 2 until you get another source point. Source points can be acquired in a variety of ways. Initially, when the game starts, you might not even have access to that, but you will find, for example, puddles, literal puddles of source energy on the floor that you can use to get source points back. You will get an ability at some point in the game, I'm not going to spoil it, that you can get source points by consuming certain things. And then, more importantly than that, and this is what really unlocks your, let's call it more regular use of these skills, is that every single act, and I really hope I'm not lying here, but I'm pretty sure that every single act has this, they will have an endless supply of source. This may be in a variety of different places, but it takes this form. It's like it's called a source fountain. It's a big green bottle. You interact with it, it provides you with a source puddle, you can consume it and you can refill your source. This is an endless supply of source. You don't have to worry about spending it. There's no limited number of casts. You can just do this however many times you want and treat these skills essentially as regular skills as long as you come back to refill your source points. Now, the hassle in this is that if you are in a very far away place, right, you might be very far away from the place that has a source fountain. For that, you have waypoints, which can take you closer to it. So, for example, we have this one here, that I would need to just move around, come to this house, enter the basement, and then walk in the basement, go to the fountain and use it. Which, you know, it's not that much of a time waste, but it does require some time investment. But the way I prefer to do it, and I guess I'll introduce this as well since we're talking about it, is that you will also obtain these items during your playthrough, which are called teleporter pyramids. These items are extremely useful, because you can do a number of things with them. So for example, at this stage I have access to 3 teleporter pyramids. I have one in my inventory on Fane, I have one in Beast's inventory as well, and then I have this one right here on the ground. So what this allows to do is, for example, I can click on mine and I can say where I want to go. So if I say I want to go to the blue one, which is in Beast's bag, it will teleport me into the rest of my party, or in this case it will teleport me to Beast. I can also leave them on the ground in some kind of a useful spot, like for example right next to a source fountain, and every time I need source I can just do this, and I can immediately gain access to source points at will. So like I said, you can do this for a bunch of different things. You can I'll give another example. Let's say you are over here. Actually, I need the rest of my party here. Let's say you are in this region and you are far away from a waypoint, and you know, you would just really like to come back here if needed. You know, you can just take your pyramid, if I can find it, which is always an issue for me. Oh my god. Beast, where is it? Beast. Here. Put it on the ground. We go and pick up our source points, get them here, do whatever we need, and then we can just go back to where we just were without having to worry about, you know, taking a waypoint that would take us far away from here. You can just literally go wherever you want on the click of a button, which is massively useful. But yeah, just a little trick that you can use these to get your source points at will, and this means that in every single act, as soon as you can find the source fountain, you can start casting your source skills however you want. Okay, my friends, so in conclusion and in summary, we covered a lot of different topics during the course of this video. For a game like this, it's bound to happen. There's a lot of things to talk about, a lot of topics to cover. It is a long video for sure. I can't help myself when I make these videos. They always end up being too long. But I did try my best to remember and share with you guys all the things that I learned while playing this game, and especially the ones that I felt made me improve on my performance significantly. So I think I shared all of them, and I think if you look at what's being said here, I for sure know that you are going to have a better time playing this game. And I will also reiterate on, you know, a couple of things which I really find important, just to reinforce the idea. And if you want to have success in the game, especially when dealing with combat encounters, which is typically what people struggle with and why people look at these videos, after all, is I would suggest having a balanced party. Have people be able to do different things. Have people capable of dealing physical damage. Have spellcasters capable of covering different types of schools. Make sure you are able to do damage, to support, to heal, disable your enemies. And also, very importantly, make sure that your characters are capable of doing more than just one thing. Trust me, there will be a variety of situations while you are playing the game that you are going to be very happy that your dedicated damage dealer is able to support your friends by, you know, by maybe giving them some armor, healing them, disabling an enemy, whatever it may be. Just a couple of small skills that require a small investment can make a very big difference. The other thing I wanted to mention as well is positioning is very important. Try to get accustomed to when you find an area or you find a group of enemies and you suspect that the fight is about to break out. The thing I always do is break up my entire party and start moving people around to get into better positions. Make sure your party is spread for the majority of situations so you don't get AoE down, because getting AoE down is like the most tragic thing that can happen in a combat in this game. So make sure you're spread out. Look for vantage points, especially if you can exploit high ground. Do it. Always take the high ground if you can take it. And also make sure to use stealth if it is appropriate. Having people starting the fight in stealth can give you a very big advantage and allow for the first thing you do in combat to be essentially free, because you are casting or attacking from stealth. In terms of exploring the game, like I said, the game world is very, very large. This is just for one act. This is larger than it seems, trust me. And all the acts are actually quite large. Always try to find areas and encounters and quests and what have you that are at your level or lower before you move into something else. If you absolutely have to go for an area or an encounter where the enemies are higher level than you, try and make sure it's the minimum difference possible, because the challenge level is going to increase significantly when you are facing off against higher level opponents than your own party. Other than this, I don't think there's a lot more to cover that hasn't already been covered in the rest of the video. All I can say is good luck for your own playthroughs. I hope you guys enjoy playing Divinity Original Sin 2. I know some people like it, some people don't like it. I think it's a pretty cool game, especially in terms of the system that they came up with for combat. You know, the action points, the way you move, the skills you have available, the interaction between the different skills and the elements and the environment, combining stuff like oil and fire or water and ice and lightning, things like that make, in my opinion, for a very, very fun and engaging combat, which I like a lot. And I don't think there are a lot of games that are able to do this as well as this game does. So it's a very big positive for this game to have that incorporated in the combat. Other than that, if you guys are interested, or if you want to see more of this, or if you want to see the advice I'm giving in this video in action, like I mentioned, I have a playthrough that is currently ongoing in Tactician difficulty and also in Honor mode. This that you are seeing right here is actually a save game from that particular playthrough. So if you want to see how I tackle, you know, different areas, different encounters, you can check that playthrough and see how I do it. I will leave a link in the description and maybe also on the video on the top here. Other than that, if there is anything else that I have not covered but you would like to know, leave a comment and I'll try to help out as best as I can. And other than that, I just want to thank you all for being here with me in the channel, watching this video. I really, really hope it was useful. Questions, suggestions, anything at all, leave a comment below. If you enjoy this type of content, consider subscribing for more, many more videos coming out soon, and it is also a free and easy way to support the channel. I hope to see you all in some other video, and until then, stay safe everyone.